Welcome, all members of Canadian Citizens for Charter Rights and Freedoms, or C3RF as we are otherwise known. It's great to have you on board for another session of In Hot. Remember, In Hot is a fighter pilot term used by fighter pilots as they roll in on the target. They're cleared to drop their weapons on the target, and they are cleared in hot, and the pilot responds cleared in hot. So we are in hot today on a very critical topic, and it's the topic of medical ethics in this day of COVID-19. We have a very able wingman with us today in the form of Dr. Barry Engelhardt. Dr. Engelhardt has been a practicing physician for some 45 years. He recently retired in 2019. He's proven himself in a variety of disciplines in the medical community. He's been emergency room work. He's been intensive care. He's been a general practitioner. Has been his main forte. But for today, the main credential that we're going to be using and asking him to speak up on is he's highly credentialed in the area of bioethics. He has a master's degree in that discipline, and it should be interesting to see what Barry has to say about what is going on in today's COVID-19 Canada. Barry, thanks for joining us on In Hot. What a great pleasure to have you on board.
Well, thanks for having me, Russ. I just wanted to clarify one thing. I was only practicing for 37 years, although maybe I look old enough to have been practicing for 45.
Yeah, you're like me. You're like me. Some people think I've been around a lot longer than I really have. But
yeah, well, thanks so much for having me.
Well, 37 years. That's still a pretty admirable stint in the area of medicine. Let me tell you.
Indeed.
I want to go back in history a little bit, Barry. All the way back to when we talk about medical ethics. I think the underpinning fundamental is the Hippocratic Oath, and I want to ask you about that Hippocratic Oath. What you think it entails, and how well versed were you as a young doctor and say a medical student? Were you versed in the obligations of the Hippocratic Oath?
Well, back in my day, I entered medical school in 1978. There were no courses in medical ethics, and to be honest, my first exposure to the Hippocratic Oath was really the day I graduated, in which we all made a pledge to follow the Hippocratic Oath. But wow, there was nothing really during my 4 years of training that focused specifically on, now, here's the oath you're going to take in 4 years. We're going to make sure by the time you get to the day where you promise that oath that you're going to really understand it. Now, there probably were subtle, mentions of it during our training, but there was nothing really as formal as there is today in terms of courses in medical ethics.
Wow. Okay, that's I find that fairly amazing. But then again, I look back at my military career, and really, the whole aspect of military warfare, the laws of war, the ins and outs of the ethics associated with warfare were for me in my career as well downstream. Didn't happen until I was about I'd say 10, 12 years into it. So perhaps we share that kind of experience. But the Hippocratic Oath, the basic premise of do no harm, from what I can see, it is based on a long and very, very ancient code that has come to us through the Hammurabi codes, through the Golden Rule, treat others as you would have them treat you. This long-standing human understanding that people are of intrinsic value, that everyone is worthwhile and worthy of being treated as a special, unique individual. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that kind of set of premises?
Yeah, I think you're right. It goes back, back to the 10 Commandments, the Hammurabi Code, etc. And it's all kind of based on that principle, the Golden Rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And the Hippocratic Oath, touches on that, but not nearly to the degree that we have consent today. And it's interesting, actually, that there's really no mention in the Hippocratic Oath about any process of consent. No. It certainly directs physicians to do the right thing and not to do the wrong thing, though it's very vague about exactly what that is. It leaves a lot of leeway. But a lot of the Hippocratic Oath is more about social conventions and how we get along together as a fraternity, so to speak. And it's not nearly as much about our relationship with the patient so much.
Now, we see that we have those understandings, and we have the whole idea of medical ethics being refined by things like the Ten Commandments, the Golden Rule, all these things that put the individual front and foremost in the process of being treated in medical practice. Then we had a bit of a break, and that break came in the form of the horrendous atrocities associated with World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And we had Nazi Germany basically sideline all of these centuries-old ethics, put them to the side, made the state the important thing that needed to be followed, made the ideology of the regime of the time, the Nazi Germany regime, sacrosanct and the priority above everything else. And at the end of the day, we had a terrible experience, and the world as a whole felt that it needed to make a correction. And it made a correction through things, and I've heard you talk about things like the Nuremberg Code, things like that followed the Nuremberg Code in the form of the Helsinki Declaration.
Mm-hmm.
Then we had the United Nations International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show the audience just some of what these international conventions dealt with. So I'm going to do a bit of a screen share here.
Great.
Here's
Yeah,
the Nuremberg Code of 1947. Can you see that, Barry?
I do, yes.
Okay, what I want to go down to is in the first couple of paragraphs there. It talks about voluntary consent of a human subject is absolutely essential. This means the person must be involved, should have legal capacity to give consent, and should be so situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice. And it goes on to say, without the intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of constraint or coercion.
Mm-hmm.
We'll come back to that a bit later, but now I want to go to the Helsinki Declaration. Can you see that?
Yes, indeed.
And I note in the first couple of paragraphs in the preamble, actually the general principles up front, it says the Declaration of Geneva of the WMA binds the physician with the words, "The health of my patient will be my first consideration." And then later on in the declaration, it talks about informed consent. There are a number of paragraphs on informed consent. It gets into some detail with expanding upon what we found in the Nuremberg Code. And then our last screen share is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. This, by the way, has been signed off, ratified by Canada, as was the Helsinki Declaration. And I want to go to Article 7 here in the ICCPR. It says, no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. In particular, no one shall be subjected without his free consent to medical or scientific experimentation. So, and we're back together. Can you see me now?
I can indeed, yes.
Okay, so there we have those really important earth-shaking documents that came out of the advent of the Second World War and all the atrocities that were committed in that war. And now we have all those covenants in place. The doctor is obligated to the patient as a first priority. Patients must have informed consent. They can't be coerced into any such consent. And basically, we're back to the golden rule that kind of kicked everything off when it comes to medical bioethics. Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask you about with COVID-19. Before the advent of COVID-19, we had things in place that basically followed the Helsinki Declaration and the ICCPR in things like the World Health Organization pandemic planning guidelines of 2019. Those pandemic planning guidelines put people as individuals first, put it up front. It said that there should be no shutting down of society. to deal with a pandemic. It was pretty upfront about that. But then when COVID-19 came along, all of a sudden, as you've said in the past, we were asked to get on a rocket ship to go to Mars. There was the only way out was everybody get on this rocket ship. We all have to go to Mars to get away from this stuff. There was no talk about alternative solutions. Well, maybe do we have to go to Mars? Can we go to the moon? Do we have to get on the rocket ship? Can't we talk about it first? Can't we see exactly what's going on? What happened? What happened with COVID-19? Why did the world shift on us when it comes to bioethics?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll almost go back a little bit for a second, Russ. And what's interesting when you look at the Nuremberg Code, Helsinki Code, etc., they make explicit that they're talking about medical experimentation and research. So we have to remember that that medical ethics has evolved from that, but it's gone way past just applying consent and all those wonderful values to just experimental research. It's supposed to be done all the time. So even when we are using something that has been proven after appropriate experimentation to be therapeutic and safe, we still go up and say, no, even though that's true, you still have to use consent. Even if the medication's been around for 50 years, is known to be safe, you still must use consent. So we've ratcheted up quite a few levels above those codes.
Yes.
So not only have we not even followed a much more primitive Nuremberg Code about experimentation, we've actually dropped down from using it in everyday life to not even using it as the Nuremberg Code would have done with experimentation. So it's actually even worse than you portrayed.
Thank you very much for that, because it's a lot of people say, well, this Nuremberg Code only applies to experimentation. This is not a case of experimentation, and there's a big debate that can be had about that subject. But I like the way that you've taken that totally out of the argument. It's not even in the debate. We're supposed to be at a point in time where we apply these ethics across the board and not just inside experimentation.
Well, exactly. And I think it's that much more egregious when people don't want to admit, well, by the way, even beyond our high levels now of morality with respect to consent, we're actually still using experimental vaccine. And I'd like to get to something a bit later. So many of the measures we're doing experimental that in particular, it's quite embarrassing that we're not doing this, but it's even worse that we're not even following something that's 60, 70 years old. And I would just add, one of the things that I've heard about is that people always want to mention Nazi Germany. And then they'll say, well, that was such an aberration. That was a different generation. It was across the water, etc. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment is one of the best examples that occurred in North America, in the United States, that went on for, I think, 4 decades.
Yes.
In which the Tuskegee's airmen, who were all Black, were used as experimental test subjects to follow the natural course of syphilis. Even though excellent treatment was available, they were deprived of that without their consent. That happened into the 60s. And the Belmont report is a report that was published following the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, talking again about the rules that we should follow when we do experimentation that clearly were not followed. So, there's all kinds of stories I could share with you about breach of medical ethics that is, isn't Nazi Germany, it isn't some aberration. This was stuff done by the medical profession for decades into the 60s and 70s. And that's what prompted us to then say, look, we have to go past just having rules about experimentation. We've got to have this at a much higher level. So I've been surprised from the get-go how little discussion there's been about medical ethics. Even, again, as you said, even if we don't believe that this is experimentation, we've fallen well short of any of the ethical codes that we normally use when practicing medicine. And I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of people are focusing on the vaccine ethical issues, and I think rightfully so. But I don't think people always realize that this is the biggest medical and social experiment that has ever been conducted in human history. This is an experiment. No one has ever told an entire world to wear a mask umpteen hours per day.
Yes.
We've never said to people, you have to stay in your home at Christmas time. Okay, we've
Mhm.
never said you can't hug your neighbor, that you've got to walk around being afraid that you could get sick from walking on the opposite side of the street with someone else, unless if you don't wear a mask. We've never told that to people. We've never taken children out of school or terrified them into wearing a mask.
Yes.
We've never done these experiments before, and it's just shocking to me that we've instituted these without realizing that who's consenting to this? Is anyone bothering to measure the potential harm of all these measures? And I'm as worried or more worried about the negative effects of a lot of these measures we've instituted than I am about the vaccines themselves. Although I'm worried about those obviously as well.
You raised so many great points. And I'm just I'm thinking, I'm wondering, when this came out, it seemed like the situation was so dire. We got all the videos from pumped to us from China
Mhm.
and from Italy, and social media went on a binge. I guess there was all kinds of social media traffic going back and forth to the point where uh, Prime Minister Boris Johnson of England basically came under the gun through social media when he initially said, "Well, we're going to treat this like the pandemic planning guidelines of 2019 state. We're going to go for herd immunity. We're going to protect the vulnerable. That's what we're going to do." He got pilloried to the point where he changed his mind about 10 days into this social media campaign. So, given all that and how dire it seemed to be, I could see where the initial call to flatten the curve. Well, maybe we need to do that because this looks like it's pretty bad. But once we got past 2 weeks, uh, and there was no talk about ethics, about what we're doing, about the benefits and risks of going this way or that way. There were some people like yourself who did speak up, and I just want to get a feel for what happened when you pointed these things out, that hey, there's an ethical issue here that we need to talk about. Wait a minute, we need to think about this or think about that. What happened when you did that?
Well, as you said, I mean, I was in practice in north of Toronto when SARS hit back in, what was that,
2003. 2000.
And that was pretty scary. I mean, I didn't see anyone with SARS. I don't think the community I was in saw with SARS, but it was pretty scary. And the mortality rate was fairly high. And rather shockingly, a tremendous percentage of the people who died from SARS were healthcare workers, particularly nurses working in ICU. So, when this came out, that was, relatively fresh in my mind. And I remember when I was doing my master's in bioethics, I completed in 2006, started in 2004. It was in downtown Toronto, where Toronto was very badly hit with SARS. So it was really indelibly imprinted in everyone's brain. So when the COVID came out in early 2020, that immediately sprang into my head, is this another SARS again? So I was legitimately quite worried. And I had no problem the first few weeks with officials want to use the precautionary principle because we just didn't know much. But by the second week of April 2020, from both a scientific perspective and an ethical perspective, I had some questions that didn't seem to get answered very well. And when I tried to approach friends and family and colleagues and et cetera, and I would write articles, people were not very open to hearing that I had concerns, which really surprised me because I was just kind of throwing it out there saying, as a guy who's got an ethics degree and been doing medicine for a while, who's been exposed to countless thousands of people with infectious diseases, I think we just need to kind of, keep a little ear open for the possibility that there's, understandably a bit of panic going on, and we maybe have to bring ourselves back more towards the center using science and ethics to kind of get ourselves better grounded. But I wasn't welcome. And that became a constant theme then for the rest of the pandemic. And it's only been the last, I'd say 6 or 9 months where I've been able to, my voice been able to be reached by people like you, by Stand Up Canada, by Canadian COVID Care Alliance, et cetera, to finally have a voice to speak about this. But it's been quite surprising to me. And I haven't heard, except for Julie Panessa, who I know well, I haven't heard too many other ethicists speak up about, not necessarily about what we should do, but about the importance of ethics and how can ethics help.
Yes, I'm talking about Dr. Julia Panazzi. She has recently come out and said that we were dealing with a paradigm shift. Sorry, she is saying that people don't want to believe that the institutions, medical institutions that they've trusted for so long, could go out of their way to pass on bad information, to corral them into one point of view and to shepherd them off onto the rocket ship to Mars.
Mhm.
They just can't believe that that would be the case, and to accept that, they have to accept that there is a paradigm shift happening in Canada, basically in the world. It's a very interesting thought. But but I can kind of see your point that this paradigm shift, because when you come out, you just mentioned that you are starting to have a voice with people like C3RF, with COVID Care Alliance. But these voices are not being picked up by the mainstream media, even though they are peopled by very, very competent persons such as yourself, experts. Some of these people are Nobel laureates, and they will just not be reported in the mainstream media, not at all. And we also have this whole thing about colleges of physicians and surgeons actively suppressing voices such as yours and going out with mandates to their medical communities to be quiet unless you support the World Health Organization way ahead on this. We don't want to hear from you, and we don't want you to pass that on to your patients. Are we in a paradigm shift? What is going on here?
Well, I think it's very complex. I think, first of all, that when we are afraid, our natural reflex is to think binary, fight or flight. And
Yeah.
so a lot of us just want a flight and hope that someone out there can just have all the answers and fix everything. Mm-hmm. And you notice our society is quite debate oriented. It's X or anti-X, very binary. And so we're not used to dialogue. We've lost the art of dialogue, of being able to say, well, I believe A, you believe B. Well, let's take the best of A and B and come up with something new and better, C, which is non-zero sum, the way debate is. We actually get something better, but we're able to listen, take the best of both what we do and come to something better. We've lost that art to some degree. And maybe that's fear. Maybe it's partly that the world is so complex now that you feel overwhelmed by the information out there. You feel that if I'm not an expert, I have no right or anything useful to contribute. So I'll just kind of listen and say and do what the experts say. And so as a family doctor, I've always considered myself a generalist. And I've been quite surprised how we have worshiped the people who know a lot about a tree, but we can't stand back and see the forest or appreciate that the forest lookers sometimes have a perspective that's nice to balance with the experts who can look at one tree.
I think that's why, we have people like politicians in our system of Western liberal democracy that are elected representatives that are in position to provide that forest outlook, to go beyond the trees and to look at the forest and to look at expert opinions on this, that, the other thing, on shepherding people onto the rocket ship to Mars, and sitting back and think, wait a minute, if we do that, well, then what's going to happen with the rest of the country? What's going to happen with kids? What's going to happen with social, with our social health? What are we bringing upon ourselves? And you talk about dialogue, Barry, and I agree 100%. We need, and I think the thing about Western liberal democracy with freedom of speech is it affords that opportunity to have dialogue. And but it seems like in the past decade or so, maybe less, it seems like freedom of speech has kind of become a dirty word and is a dirty phrase, and it's stopping us from taking care of the public good, and therefore this dialogue. Instead of having dialogue, we have one side of the equation that says no, we can't talk about that. And I'll give you an example that is today. Today we have a situation. You talk about fight or flight, and people, the lizard brain takes over, and they run away. But now we've come to the point where people have stopped running, and they're saying, "I'm going to start fighting." And we've got tens of thousands of truckers with tens of thousands of trucks on Parliament Hill right now. We've got them digging in, and we've got the other side, the side that's supposed to be promoting the dialogue, the free speech, pillaring them as Nazis, as white supremacists. We don't want to talk to them. They've got nothing to offer. They're bad people. They're hooligans. And this is just, this is a recipe for disaster. So who's responsible for the dialogue and making sure the dialogue happens?
Well, it's interesting that one of the things that we've maybe lost a little bit, perhaps in the avalanche of information now, the age of information technology, is that people have not understood that there's a difference between information and understanding or wisdom. So we have information technology, but it isn't necessarily understanding technology, or what I refer to as wisdom technology. So people just think if you get enough data, it'll tell us what to do. There's the answer. And there's a misunderstanding of what science is. Science is a process of inquiry, meaning we ask questions to find better answers. So science is really, without you realizing or not, with you realizing or not, we all start with a certain theory of how things are working out there. And science means that then we question that, we criticize that, we make conjectures about how maybe we can get a better idea of how it works, and then we test it. And no matter what, if we do the testing properly, no matter what it shows, then that's a better understanding for the universe than we had before. So questioning is critical to the process of science. And it means that we have to be humble, we have to be open-minded, and not only willing, but actually anxious to ask questions. And if we don't do that, then we're not doing science. Science is not just a recipe book of here's the truth, information technology. It's about asking questions to understand better. And we're not doing science because people think it's just a recipe book that we give to people. And so we need to teach people that part of doing science, as with ethics, is always about being open-minded, humble, questioning, knowing that we're always struggling to get closer to the truth, but every question you ask that gives you an answer invariably leads to 5 more questions or more. And that's exciting. It can be frustrating, but you inch closer to the truth. And we're not trying to do that anymore. We just want to stay, shaking under our beds, assuming someone's got the cookbook, the recipe to how to get out of this. And it's like, we've never seen this before to this degree. We have to keep asking questions to find better answers. And what people often don't realize is that we all have innate biases. There's just no way around that. In ethics, we say there is no view from nowhere. You have biases, get over it. And the way you balance those biases, whether they're consciously realized or otherwise, is you invite different opinions, different views. You ask questions, you invite even contrary opinions, because by doing that, that you will be able to balance your own biases. And, we've seen throughout history, and Nazi Germany is a great example, where when we become, there's been a statement that says the most dangerous thing in the universe is a closed mind.
Yeah.
And we saw that in Nazi Germany. When you have a closed mind, you are so sure of what you're doing that you're prepared to engage in what is referred to as the killing certainties, because you're not willing to be open the door even a crack to examine, gee, is this really the right thing to do? Should I really kill this person because they think different than me? And when we don't have that humility to admit we don't know all there is to know, to be open-minded, to question, to invite even contrary views, we're not doing science and we're not doing ethics. And I think we've missed that perspective.
Is that, do you think that's what's happening in Canada and around the world today? Has the door been closed to open questioning, to have ideologies taken the place of free discourse and the exchange of information?
Well, I would agree with Julie that we are going to have a paradigm shift where we have to recognize that we are the most social creatures on the planet, bar none. A third of our brain is concerned with communication. There is no other species that nurtures its young for as long as we do, and who keeps in touch with their young, their children and grandchildren for decades. No other species does that. And so we have to realize that we are social creatures and we are very tribal creatures. And we are taught from a very young age, stay within the limits of what the tribe dictates. Don't question, don't rock the boat. You know, and the expression evil flourishes because good people do nothing, because we're not prepared to question the tribe. We think that they have an ideology that will stay intact forever, that is totally right. We don't have to question it. We can be, very close-minded about it, and we have to evolve past that. So the paradigm shift is really, yes, it's good to be social, but when taken to an extreme, when it means closed-mindedness, not open-mindedness, when it becomes intolerant, when it doesn't allow for questioning, then we've taken tribalism, our socialism, which is our social issues, which are so important and so primal to us, we've taken them too far. And I think that's the paradigm shift that we have to recognize has been going on, and we have to learn to deal with it better.
Yeah, it certainly seems that at least one side is dug in, and I look at, we've been talking about Nazi Germany a little bit here, and I'm seeing some disturbing parallels. Like Nazi Germany, the ideology would suffer criticism. If you criticize that ideology, you were quickly packed off and hung or shot. And I'm thinking about William Bonhoeffer. I'm thinking about the White Rose movement in Nazi Germany that tried to speak up, but were summarily taken care of. We seem to have that same kind of pushback from our own leaders when it comes to discourse and free speech and talking. And I'm noting that they're hell bent on bringing in new legislation bills, the old bill C10 and C36, which require web users to be licensed by the CRTC, by a government agency. Bill C36 has onerous hate speech provisions in it, where if online if someone thinks you're going to say something bad online, they can have you put in house arrest, and you could be fined $75,000. We have all these government actions coming into play to stop up this normal discourse and questioning. And then we have big tech. We have things like Twitter and other organizations actually shutting down and canceling people like a president of the United States, which is unheard of. If you want to hear from anybody, you think it would be the president of the United States and see, how he's feeling today, and is he in a good mood or not? But no, he was taken offline. So I'm seeing some disturbing parallels here between you cannot question the ideology. As a matter of fact, we're going to burn books, and we've seen that happen in the past, and we've seen what's happened as a result. So with that, I think I note that I think one of your speeches, you had a topic where you had top 20 things we have done during the COVID that we never do in medicine. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to just pick out a couple of them and
sure,
and get your input on them. And the first one, go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, just before you do, Russ, I agree with you about your previous comments, and
okay,
we'll certainly see when the authorities become more extreme. Sadly, you'll start to see the other extreme come out too much as well.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I can tell you, the people I've been working with, and when I've been downtown Ottawa the last 4 days, we're working so hard to stay in the middle. We're not trying to push an ideology on people. I mean, I know if you heard of Mama Bear as part of Police on Guard.
Yes, I'm familiar with them. Yeah.
And it's so great. It says it's okay to wait. They're not trying to push a specific ideology. You shouldn't or you should. It's okay to wait. Do your own research. If someone wants to wear a mask, wear a mask.
Yeah.
If you want to self-hibernate, self-hibernate. If you want to take the vaccine, take the vaccine. So many people have said, look, you do what you feel is best to protect yourself. We're okay with that. So we need to be able to keep that middle of the road sacred, because otherwise, when you get too many people at extreme ideology, it almost always generates the opposite, which is no better usually. And we've seen this.
It's a vicious circle.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you're just setting up a vicious circle. And here at C3RF, we like to say, we go by the charter, and the charter says that you have fundamental freedoms, and it's got a section 1 clause that is a limitations clause that says, oh, by the way, you can't expect to be totally unrestricted. There has to be some reasonable limits, and but those limits have to be as limited as possible, and they have to be related to the objective of the restriction. and they have to be demonstrably justified. So all we do at C3RF is we say, if you're going to take away freedoms, you need to show us the evidence. And quite frankly, we're not seeing any evidence at all. We're just seeing a lot of verbiage and ideology being put back at us.
Well, that was what I mentioned earlier as well, is if you're going to restrict my freedoms, I'm okay with that, provided you are transparent and you give me an ethical, scientifically based justification for why that's going to do more good than harm. So you have to acknowledge right up front, anything we do in medicine always has the potential for harm. So acknowledge that when you do these things, there's going to be harm, that you're going to actively monitor them. And just like the successes, you're going to be transparent about the failures as well. And if at some point the harms outweigh the benefits, we'll know that because you've been transparent and you've been monitoring it. But there's been so little measure or acknowledgement even of the harms that we're going to do to young children who are wearing masks all the time, are afraid they're going to die, afraid they're going to kill their grandparents. In these delicate ages where they're learning their social skills, they're not allowed to play together, go to school together. They have to wear masks. The harm that's going to do to these kids, I can't even imagine. I hope it's minimal, but are we even bothering to acknowledge or monitor that? I don't think so.
That's such a good point, and that transparency issue is so critically important. And quite frankly, that is it just doesn't seem to be there with this COVID-19 response. And I'm thinking about adverse events. We hear drips and drabs about bad things happening, but we don't see any follow through by the press or by the mainstream media, or by the medical community, or by the College of Physicians and Surgeons to talk frankly about these adverse effects that are ongoing. I see some databases offshore. It's hard to get good data out of North America, it seems. You have to go to Europe or Japan or India or Indonesia, Vietnam. I see data coming out of those places, and it paints a disturbing picture about some of the problems that these new technology vaccines are visiting upon our populations. Transparency, boy, that should be a byword of the age that we're in right now.
Well, it's such a critical ethical principle for two reasons. One is, if you're not transparent, our automatic reaction is, what are you not telling me? And why are you not telling me?
Yes.
So that's the first part. And then the second part is really a matter of respect. If I'm not transparent with you about something, Russ, it says that in my head, I'm thinking, well, Russ is too dumb to understand this. Or
exactly.
Russ doesn't deserve to know this, or it'd be too dangerous for Russ to know this. And that's disrespectful. That's disrespectful. And so I think transparency is a matter of not only information, it's even more important, it's an issue of respect.
Yeah, I think that people who approach it that way and say that, Russ just would never understand this, they're being what I call sanctimonious. Aren't they holier than thou, and aren't they putting themselves on a pedestal? Boy,
that was a long-standing way we did medicine, where it was, well, the doctor knows best, so when he tells you or she tells you what to do, you just do it, because really, what do you know? And it took us 2,500 years to finally realize that we went from doctor knows best to then, well, maybe the doctor should tell the patient things that most people would want to know, and then or what the doctor thinks they should know. And then we said, well, maybe what we should do is not just tell them what the doctor thinks they should know, but what most patients should know or would want to know, until finally we realized, hold it, if I'm in a therapeutic relationship with you, shouldn't I make sure that you as an individual are respected for your uniqueness, and make sure that when I do disclosure as part of consent, that you understand everything that you need to know as your individual person that you need to make the decision about whatever therapeutic intervention we're going to do. Because you're unique, and each time in your life is unique. We have to make sure that we disclose to you in a transparent fashion all the information that you need that's relevant for you at this point in time to decide if you want to have your hip replaced or something. So we've evolved to a point of greater transparency because it comes out of respect for the uniqueness of each individual, and as you said earlier, the worthiness of each individual as a sacred being.
Now we're coming full circle. We're coming full circle back to the bioethics that underpin all of medicine. We're coming back to the Golden Rule. We're coming back to the Hammurabi Code. We're coming back to all those things that came out of World War II with the declarations that we talked about. And we're talking about medicine as the art of the individual. We're treating the individual. Along those lines, what do you think about mass vaccination programs that treat everybody the same? That everybody has to get vaccinated and everybody has to get, oh, the vaccines aren't working that good, so no, everybody's got to get boosted. What do you think of that?
Well, it's so contrary to what we've ever done in medicine before. I mean, quite apart from the fact that these are gene therapies which have never been used before, quite apart from the fact that we've never been successful with any coronavirus vaccine before, we have to realize that even if these were well known and typical mechanism of action, we always know that there's going to be potential harm for any intervention. So for example, when you look at, ever heard of the CPS, the Compendium of Pharmaceuticals and Specialties? It's now a 2-volume, it's so big. It lists all the drugs that are available and all the vaccines are available for use with patients. So the first thing, if you look at any drug, the first thing is indications. Who would benefit from this? It's never everybody. The second part is contraindications. Who should never get this? And then the third part is warnings. People who maybe could get it, but you gotta be really careful. So those are the first 3 things that come up. And I defy anyone to look at the CPS and find anything in there that does not have a contraindication. It doesn't exist. I defy anyone to find anything in there that doesn't have warnings about who maybe could take it, but they got to be really careful and monitored. And I defy anyone to find anyone in there that the next part isn't adverse reactions. They're always there. So we know when we come out with a drug, it's never going to be for everybody. There are always going to be exceptions. We often don't know all the exceptions right off the bat, but we'll find them over time. Because ultimately, every medication is to some degree experimental, because we're never going to know all there is to know. So we always have to keep an eye on those rare canaries, and where we're like, we better not give them this to this group of individuals as well, or people with this condition. So this business of thinking that we can just give this to everybody, no exceptions, is something we've never done in medicine before. No,
it's incredible. And as you say, everybody is different. Everyone's got a different physical capacity for medical treatment. And you're covering off a number of these things that I wanted to talk to you about. The 20 things that
yes,
doctors don't do that they're doing during COVID-19. And this other one here, and it speaks to risk-benefit analysis. It seems to me that all the models that we've been subjected to, all of them are one-sided. All the models, all the risk-benefit analysis seem to be centered or anchored around the concept of the vaccines and locking society down. We have to get on a rocket ship, lock society down, and go to Mars. And Mars is the vaccines. And there's no discussion, no modeling, no introspection with respect to the adverse effects of lockdowns. What happens when you take a society and you tell everybody that they can't talk to each other? And there's been no study, and we're 2 years into this, going on 3. There's no study, no indication of what we're doing to ourselves. Why are we doing that?
Well, it's so interesting. You've probably heard of Richard Feynman, a famous physicist / philosopher, who said, nature allows us only to calculate probabilities, yet science is not collapsed. And what people don't realize is science is a probabilistic endeavor. And I've often asked people, what, as a family doctor, what do you think my job is as a family doctor? And they kind of come up with all kinds of things. I said, no, you know what my job is? It's to predict the future. Every patient comes to a doctor because they want the future predicted. If I don't do this, what's going to happen? If I do take this drug or surgery, we're all just trying to predict the future. And we're trying to predict the future of harms and benefits. Because again, everything's probability. So if you take this drug, there's a 75% chance it will work. but there's a 1% chance that you may get a rash to it. But I don't know if you're part of the 75% is going to work for, or the 25% is not going to work for. I don't know if you're going to be part of the 1% that have a serious side effect, or the 99% who won't. And we always have to balance off harms and benefits, and realizing that we're ultimately going to be making a prediction about the future. It's all based on probabilities. And so we have to be very humble when we practice medicine, because we're trying to weigh off unknowns to some degree. We'll never know exactly whether the person right in front of me is part of that 1% and the 75%, or part of the 99 and the 25. We just don't know. And people often forget that any intervention we do, it's a complex interaction between the patient and the intervention. So if you take a pill, you change it and it changes you. You absorb it, you change it as you absorb it, you metabolize it. And so you change it and it changes you. That's referred to as pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. And so it isn't just a matter of what does it do, it's also how do I relate to it? And everyone's going to relate a little bit differently. Even identical twins are not completely identical, and so we could say, well, peanuts are a very nutritious food. They're good for you. Well, not if you have an anaphylactic reaction to them, because that's a complex interaction between a peanut and an individual. And so we have to recognize the uniqueness of that, and we have to be humble about that. And we have to weigh off the risk-benefit analysis of that.
And so you're saying that, it seems to me you're saying that there is a responsibility there, a dire responsibility, to take a look at the obverse side of the coin, to say, okay, if we do this, then what are the immediate effects, and what are the knock-on effects? How are the other aspects of other communities impacted by this particular measure? And it doesn't seem like that is happening as far as I could see up to this point in time with COVID-19.
Yeah, there's obviously some populations, Russ, who could potentially benefit a lot from the vaccine. But obviously, there are populations that are going to benefit very little from it. And it may turn out that their risk of having side effects is far greater than the benefit they may attain from that. So we've got to be able to do risk stratification and harm stratification and benefit stratification to be able to say, look, these people should really take it. These people should think seriously. These people should stay away from it. Indications, contraindications, warnings. That's how we've always done medicine.
I like that. I like your approach of risk stratification. I think that is an extremely important concept that seems to be in the baby that's been thrown out with the bathwater here, I think. And along those lines of risk stratification, you talk about children, and you talk about children being basically forced to have the vaccine. What are your thoughts on children and them taking this vaccine?
Well, I was so blessed yesterday to be able to introduce Dr. Paul Alexander to the stage downtown Ottawa, and he spoke exactly to this point, that the risk of a child developing and dying from COVID is minuscule. It's almost non-existent. It's as close to zero, I think, as you can get without being zero, or it may actually be zero. So there's no upside for them in terms of their personal health, which is completely different from all of our childhood vaccines, where we give them to children for their benefit primarily. So for them personally, there's very little risk of health, of benefit. So it's almost all downside for them. And it's pretty clear that, at least for me, that it's a significant moral question to ask, should we expect a child to take risks for the benefit of someone my age? We've never done that before. And I have 6 grandchildren, and the idea that I would want any one of them to take even a minuscule risk for disease which is not going to harm them to benefit me, that makes me nauseous to think about that. I would never want them to do that. And so the fact that we're trying to almost use children as human shields, like we've never seen that before. I don't know of any reasonable culture that would ever do that.
No, I just thinking back on my own military career, and 29 years I was with the Air Force. Did experience some combat operations with F-18s in the first Persian Gulf War. And when I was asked to do that, I was honored to do so because I thought I was defending and protecting my country, my countrymen, and in particular my family and my kids and my grandkids. I fight for them. They don't fight for me. And to put it and to give me a prospect where it's my grandchildren that are going to be offered up on an altar to save me. Like you, I find it very, very disturbing to the point where it is. I find it cowardly. I just don't know how else to describe it.
Well, exactly. I mean, our almost all of us have an immediate revulsion to the idea of training children to carry weapons into a battle or a war. It's like, we don't do that. Well, they should not be taking risks. Our job is to protect them. And I think, Mama Bears is such a good example of that organization, because a mother bear will sacrifice her life to protect her young. That's how we're trained. It's part of the social fabric of who we are. We protect our young at all costs. That's why it's so hard to be a parent, because you constantly have to make sacrifices for them, because you have this incredible moral responsibility to protect them that you cannot understand it until you become a parent.
And put in those terms, sorry, Barry, but put in those terms, it's I just can't help but think of the hypocrisy of here we are asking our children to sacrifice on our behalf, us older people who don't have that many years of life left. Actually, they have everything ahead of them, and we have very little. But it's such a hypocritical concept when you consider that you mentioned child soldiers. We had the experience with a child soldier that was caught on the battlefield. Whether he was a child soldier or not is kind of debatable at the time, because he was 15, just about to turn 16. But he became a cause celeb and was awarded $10.5 million. We have to. A Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian, especially children Canadians. But that doesn't seem to be the case with COVID-19 and our children and grandchildren, where they have to take the shot for us.
Yeah, I find it incredible. And there may be children out there who, because of comorbidities, quite sadly, in childhood they have a comorbidity that may put them at high risk for getting seriously sick from COVID. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, despite the fact this is experimental, the parents of that child, in consultation with that child's physician, may want to opt to get the vaccine. Yes. Now, I think that's a rare circumstance, but I can see how that could occur. But you know what? When you do that, you do it only for that child's benefit. Mm-hmm. And the parents make that decision, not some expert or some politician out there. Those parents who are responsible for that child, in consultation with a physician who knows that child, makes that decision. But it's only ever to protect that child. And so I would not want to rule out that existing, but it has to be kept within those ethical boundaries.
Agreed. And now we've come full circle back on the Nuremberg Code and the aspect of having informed consent. In this case, we're talking about children. We're talking about parents making that kind of a decision on the basis of full informed consent. They know all the ins and outs of the risks and the benefits associated with that particular procedure. But certainly, we do not force our children to do something like this on our behalf. I just can't see.
They should be considered sacred. Yeah. Their lives should be considered sacred until they are of a capacity to be able to make their own decisions, and that will vary. That will vary from child to child about when they have capacity to make certain decisions or not. But until they do, we have to value their lives as sacred and protect them.
Well, Barry, no, I'm so glad you're bringing up these points. I think these are points that need to be front and center in the debates or the dialogue that we're having over COVID-19 and what we need to do from here on out. I think what you have to say has to get out into the mainstream, and I'm hoping I can do whatever I can to get it out there. Is there anything our C3RF members can do to help you get it out, or to help your efforts, or any information that you'd like to throw their way?
I think we talked about a paradigm shift, and I think the best thing we can do is to work towards that paradigm shift, because one of my worries is if we get out of this pandemic by just limping out of it, and we don't learn important lessons about asking questions, about not blindly following experts and authorities, about recognizing not only our right, but our duty to ask questions, to become educated, to realize that even though we may not be experts and know a lot about a particular tree, we're forest seers. And as forest seers, that's important. You don't have to just be an expert to have an intelligent understanding of things. And so the more we can encourage people to be full Canadians and be involved in respectful dialogue, to think, to search for better answers, to question, the more we can do that, the better, because that to me is the most important lesson perhaps that we have to take from this pandemic. Is we've got to be acting as true Canadians and engage in building and maintaining democracy all the time. And I think when we do, we're going to get a much better country to live in, and we will be world leaders about how democracy is supposed to function and the good it can do when we do it really well.
So well said, and so wise, Barry. When we get out of this, we cannot do this again. I mean, exactly. We are making mistakes because we're not talking about things. We're not dialoguing. We are making mistakes that Canada and the world are going to have to live with for a long time, and we cannot afford to do this again. We have to learn our lessons, and I hope our C3RF members take this interview and spread it as widely as possible, because I think it's critical for this kind of dialogue, this kind of information to get out there. Having said that, Barry, I'm going to wish you all the best with all of your opportunities to speak, to get the word out, because I think it's critically important. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks so much, Russ. I really, really appreciate it.
Okay. See you later.
Take care.